Hello, my name is Steven, and welcome to my media piece about birds. So, say you were going to go bird watching in the field. Well, before you can really have a productive time bird watching, you really need to know a bunch of some things, such as bird anatomy, field marks, how to use field guides, and how to spot indirect evidence of birds. So, I'm going to break these things down for you in the next few minutes. So, let's start with bird anatomy. Um, Birds, we're going to look at four specific anatomical structures: bones, feathers, beaks, and feet. As you can see on this picture of a bald eagle here, well, you can't see their bones, but you can see their feathers, you can see its beak, you can see and its feet and its talons that it has, and those are all very distinct characteristics of the bald eagle. And so we're going to learn to identify birds using these anatomical structures. Starting with bones, um, birds have skeletal structures that are incredibly similar to all other vertebrates, which is pretty quite interesting. They have a backbone, a head, a skull, um, these kind of like arms that are the bones of inside their wings, and they have the chest and rib cage bones, and they have these femurs and legs and feet bones. It's actually roughly very similar to most other vertebrates, which is interesting. But we don't get to see the bone structures usually of birds when we go bird watching because they're encased in feathers. But speaking of feathers, they're super cool. They're incredibly useful. The birds use feathers for multiple purposes, such as flight, insulation, waterproofing, and display. Um, which in display, it can be useful for recognizing species, for attracting mates. Some species of birds, like for the peacock, for example, use their feathers as defense. They pop their feathers up real large, and it looks like they have tons of eyes, and they're just like a much bigger animal than they really are. And also, some species of birds have feathers that provide them camouflage, so that they can be um, hidden from predators and also from prey if they're predatory themselves. The structure of a feather is quite intricate, actually. It's very lightweight. Most of you have probably seen or picked up a feather before, but there's these there's this large shaft called the rachis running up the middle of it, and then there's these small like fibers coming off of the center one, and you can see this little blown up area is what kind of that looks like there, and there's even smaller um, barbules coming off each barb. So pretty quite interesting how the structure of the feathers are, and they're super lightweight so that they can enable flying and things like that. So pretty cool. Birds also have many different kinds of beaks. So when you're trying to identify birds, looking at their beaks can be helpful. This bird here, for example, has a beak shaped for cracking seeds. The hummingbird has one for sipping nectar. So they can stick this super long beak into uh, some flowers and other things. The pelican has a giant beak that's meant for scooping fish, which is a different and unique use. Woodpeckers have a beak designed for chiseling wood. Um, Certain animals, like eagles, will have, and most like predatory birds, will have a beak that's like kind of hooked like this and meant for tearing meat. And then some birds, like the toucan, have beaks that their primary function is for air conditioning. I guess they can send their energy to their beaks, and it dissipates away from their body somehow, which is quite interesting. But they have a super large beak to body ratio relative to most other birds, which is cool. But learning to identify birds based on their beaks um, can help you understand what kind of birds they are and like what they use their beaks for. Another way that you can identify birds is by their feet. So many birds will have feet that are built for climbing, some for swimming, some for running. You can recognize um, like an ostrich or an emu. They can this structure helps them propel forward faster. Some are perching birds that their foot would kind of look like this. The eagle or other predatory animals that we just talked about um, will have like curled claws with talons. for grasping things, which is interesting, and catching prey. And then other birds, like chickens, will scratch in the dirt to find insects to eat, and so they'll have feet that might look like that. So again, looking at the feet of a bird is another way to evaluate what kind of bird it is. So that's it for the anatomical structures of birds. Let's get into how you can recognize different birds besides just their anatomy using field marks. So if you're in the field and you see a bird, you can analyze their plumage, which is the color, patterns, and highlights of their feathers. So you can kind of see, like in this example bird, there's like some striping going on the head, and we can't see the rest of their body, but we can imagine these stripes or other colors would persist on their body's feathers as well. You can evaluate their size, the general shape, the behavior of the bird, their flight mechanisms and maneuvers, as well as their bill, which is the structure of their beak that we talked about just a couple slides ago. You can evaluate all of these things to determine what kind of bird it might be. And once you have an idea of, the all of these different markings for a given bird that you see in the field, you can use a field guide to identify that bird and learn more about it. So field guides are wonderful tools that have a page dedicated to a given type of bird, and it will give you some pictures and some information about the bird, including a scientific name, which is kind of hard to see. It's really small underneath the common name, yellow warbler, but there's a scientific name that reads Dendroica petechia, and which is the genus and species name for the yellow warbler. But these guides are incredibly useful for when you're birding. They're typically arranged by color. So, for example, they'll have a brown birds in one section, yellow birds in another, red, and so on and so forth. That way, it's easy to, if you see, because color is the easiest way to identify birds. If you see a brown bird, you can go to the brown bird section and then get more detailed about finding the bird that you're looking at in real life. And they also provide a scientific classification of birds using the Linnaeus system here. So we're going to give you some examples of what that might look like. The bald eagle is in the domain Eukaryota, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Aves, and all birds will fall under the class Aves, at least according to current field guides. And then where all birds kind of start branching off from each other is in the order. So the bald eagle is of the order Accipitriformes, family Accipitridae, genus Haliaeetus, and species Leucocephalus. You can contrast this with the red-tailed hawk, which is very similar all the way down to it's exactly the same except for the genus and species name. So same order, same family, but the genus is Buteo and the species is Jamaicensis. But another bird that's much more different than these hawk species, these hawk birds, are the ruby-throated hummingbird. You can see, again, it's part of class Aves, but it is of the order Apiodoformes, family Trochilidae, genus Archilochus, and species Colubris. So the branch happens in the order for these birds. So, and there's millions of birds out there that you can all kinds of different classifications for them. Anyways, that's it for using a field guide. And then one other tool you could have when you're out in the field looking for birds is to spot indirect evidence. This can look like tracks, like that, scat, nests, or castings or eggs. These are all, if you see these in the field, it's evidence that birds have either been there sometime recently or maybe they're still around. But it's important to kind of, depending on the situation, leave the things alone, especially if there's like a nest or eggs, birds might be living there. But if you spot these, it's a good sign there's birds around. You can look for clues there too. Anyways, you should now be equipped to go bird watching. Use this information wisely, and hope you have a good time out there in the nature.